All right, I'd like to go back to the Old Testament. Take your Bibles, turn over to the book of Genesis. We'll be there for just a little while. I think it extraordinary sometimes to think about the creation of man. And the reason for that is there's a lot of people today who don't believe in the creation story. And I've had a discussion with a couple of those people recently that don't believe at all in the creation of man and how it works. But I wanted us today to look in the Bible and look at the things that the Bible speaks about when you talk about how we got here, the creation story, and all the things that go along with it. So we're going to start in the very beginning, in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. This is a pretty lengthy reading, but it's one that really and truly gives us a sense of direction as far as what my premise of my study is. So if you will, if you'll start there, Steve, we're going to start with you because we've been missing you and we're glad to have you back. And so if you'll read verse 26 and 27 of Genesis 1 for us, we're going to get our platform there.
God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them.
Okay, now let's talk just a little bit about this word image. This word image. What do you suppose the word image really signifies? Anybody got any ideas about that? Does it just mean we look like God? Or how is that, the image of God? There's a lot of things to go into the word image there. In the likeness of, the similitude of. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that we look like God. I don't know how God looks, and nobody else does either. They've not seen God as far as being able to look upon God. But whenever we think about the start of what he said, God said, let us make man in our image. Now, the word our has troubled a lot of people for a lot of years. They say, well, who was God talking about? Who in the world was God talking about? Our is in the plural. It's not in the singular. Anybody have any ideas about that?
Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Okay. The Trinity of God, or the three as we know of the Godhead, God the Father, Christ the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Those images in the likeness, in the likeness, in the similitude, the image of. Now, we can talk about how it is that we are in the image of God. But before we do, let's look a little closer to something else here. He said, first of all, and there's a lot of things said here. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. Now, that's what Steve read to us a while ago. What does it mean to have dominion over? Okay. Maybe not so much to use the word rule, okay? The dominion actually puts a little bit of superiority over these things. Now, when I say superiority, somebody says, well, what does that actually mean? It doesn't actually mean so much to rule over. Now, we are in control, no doubt, as far as what God has said, but the dominion over. This is, we watch after, we manage, we look at. Now, if man is going to have dominion over, that means he's going to be responsible. He's going to have some responsibilities there. Fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, the cattle, the earth, every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. In our society today, there's a lot of misguided people about how we should manage things. We have people that are pro this and anti that, We have some people that believe that it's all right to do certain things when it's not all right to do certain things. We have abusive people in our society today that abuse every aspect of what we're talking about here. All those things that God gave us the dominion over. Some people, they'd catch every fish in the sea and destroy every animal on the earth. But that's not what God intended. he says, you have somewhat of control to manage. This is dominion. You have somewhat control to manage. Now, I don't go along with how some people manage certain things. We're supposed to manage even the forest that's growing out in front of us. We're supposed to manage that. We're not supposed to go out here and cut every tree out of the forest down and completely annihilate the forest. We're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to take away every aspect of a certain kind of animal. We've had certain animals that's gone extinct. And why is it that certain animals go extinct? Because man doesn't manage well, Now, we see that sometimes man does take control. And sometimes man has a little bit of an intellect about how to manage things and how to do things. But this is another thing that he said. God created man in his own image, and in the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Now, I've said so many times, and most of you know how I feel about this. God created male and female. And whenever he put it all together in the very beginning, you know what he did? He gave male and female. He did that. Now, I'm not going to go into the aspect of how things sometimes get out of kilter with that, but God had the idea that, hey, man, he needs female. Every animal, we see an old deer, an old buck deer out there. You know what he needs? He needs a doe. And why does he need that doe? Because he needs to be able to regenerate. And that's what God said in the very beginning. He wanted man to regenerate. He wanted animals to regenerate. And that's what the dominion over animals and the kingdom and all of the things that go along with it, that's what God intended. For man to look out and look at it, and if he sees a situation there and there's a problem out there, take control of that problem and allow that. We brought back certain species of animals that was almost extinct. Now some of them have gone away. Fowls of the air, same way. But I've looked at I like the idea of thinking about creation. Look at Genesis 2 and 7. I want you to look at this one for a minute. Jeff, I'll stay on this left side for just a moment. Genesis 2 and 7. Now listen to this one, if you will.
And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul.
There's some very, very unique points here that needs to be made about this particular passage. And somebody says, well, this is basic, fundamental, and it is. But this is so important to understanding how God looks at man. Now, he says, the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. That tells us a little bit about how this thing all started, right? He'd already made and created the heavens and the earth. Then he created man. And from the dust of the ground created he him. Now, as the Bible teaches us, whenever we pass away and the soul leaves the body, that constitutes death. When the soul leaves the body, that constitutes death. The Bible teaches us that the soul goes back to God which gave it. Somebody says, well, I don't know about that. That's what the book says. But then he says the body will go back to the dust of the earth. That's the beginning. That's the ending. The body will go back to the dust of the earth. Well, if God did it in the beginning and he put the soul and the body together when he took from the dust of the earth and made the body, and then he breathed, what did it say? He said he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. That's how he got life. God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So every breath we take, similitude, likeness of that in the very beginning of God, that's life. What happens when you stop breathing? You go, you die. Okay? Unless somebody can start you back, you're going to die. You got to have that breath of life. Where did the breath of life come from? It came from God. It came from God. Now, in all honesty, when you think about this, he says, man became a living soul. Let's tie this thing together. The breath of life breathed into the old dust of the earth, the body, became a living soul. So the soul and the breath of life is so important. When does the soul leave the body? When breath stops, right? That's when the soul leaves the body, when breath stops. Somebody said, well, this is first grade stuff. Did you know that there's a lot of people in our society today that don't have one iota, one clue about these things we're talking about? They don't know anything at all about these things we're talking about. How important is the breath of life? That's the soul of man. Without the breath of life, we can't have the soul of man. So, these are fundamental, very basic things, but it's things that people don't even think about anymore. Now, let's go to some of the things that people do today. If the breath of life is life, if breath is life and this breath is soul, there's a lot of people doing a lot of things to take out that breath, aren't they? They don't care much about that breath. People doing a lot of things to observe and take into their body things that's killing the breath of life. They're killing their soul, And a lot of people they say, well, I don't agree with you on that. Think about it. Whenever you take something into your body that kills the breath that you're breathing, that constitutes the soul, what happens to you? You die. And so you did that. Somebody said, oh, no, now they didn't commit. So I think a lot of times people abuse themselves in such a way, they don't think at all about what they're doing. They're killing themselves. I said to a fellow the other day, I said, if I were you, I'd think hard. He can't even get his breath hardly. And the reason is, and I don't mean to be offensive with this, the reason is he's just absolutely will not lay the cigarettes down. He says, well, you ain't never smoked. You don't know how hard this is. No, but I've done a lot of other things pretty hard, and I had to quit. Didn't have no choice, or either I was going to die of one, So, in all honesty, we're looking at very fundamental, basic things. Now, let's look at Genesis 5, verse 1. Let's come over to our right side. Genesis 5, verse 1. Nancy, you're my first run of the morning.
This is the book of generations of Adam. On the day that God created man in the likeness of God made him.
Read verse 2, please.
Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created.
I had the office argument one time about this verse. Who named Adam's wife? Who named her? Eve? Huh? Adam did. Adam did. Okay? God gave him that right. And he named her. And you go back and look at that. But you see, people said, well, now, God, But think about this for this is very basic stuff that a lot of times people get so confused over. I heard this argument before. When you read this right here, he says, in the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Let's talk about the likeness. The likeness. How are we like God? Anybody got any ideas about that? How are we like God? Okay, we are made subject to God. When we say subject, we're subject to those things that God puts before us. And God gives us directions and he gives us instructions of how to live our lives. But we are like God because we are a living being with a soul. Okay? We're a living being with a soul. Unlike, now listen to me on this, and people say, they get mad at me about this. I don't have a dog at home. I've had dogs in the past, and I love them, and they're great and wonderful, and my son's got a dog, and they love it. What is it in life that has, as we know, a soul? It's man. It's man. Now, somebody said, well, you can't say animals don't have a soul. Yes, can. Because God didn't put, nothing in the Bible indicates that God made a soul to a dog. Didn't make a soul to a cat. Didn't make a soul. They said, well, what about doggy heaven? Show me where that's at. You know, a deer, wonderful, wonderful thing. He's made, he's put here to eat. You know, kill and eat. You know, these animals, kill and eat. You know, don't abuse them. Just kill them and eat them if you need them. You know, it's fine. No problem. But what about a soul? None of them got one, right? But man does. Now, when you go back to this verse right here, if we are made in the image and the likeness of God, here's where it is. It deals with the soul. That's the image and likeness of God. That's the only eternal part of man that exists. And when I say eternal, everybody know what that word means, right? That's forever and ever, okay? That soul that is in this old body, that's the image of God, because that's an eternal part of man. It's going to live forever and ever and ever, right? No doubt. So, whenever you're discussing this with people, they say, oh, you can't. Now, you know, my dog or my cow or my horse, all that's wonderful, but they don't possess a soul. So whenever you talk about, they say, the very first graders know that. No, I tell you what, first graders may know it, but I've met some people that don't understand the principle of how that we're made in the image of God. We're made in the image of God because God breathed into the nostrils the breath of man and imparted a living soul. So there's the likeness and the similitude of God. So every one of you are godly beings, okay? Every single one of you are godly beings. And you're godly beings because you have an eternal part that God put in you. Now, let's go further. Let's see if we can get something else. And Steve, you're exactly right, but the special aspect of man, you know, when I say little babies are special, they are. But grown-ups are special too, because every one of us fit the category, just like he's talking about there. You know, I can see the capitalization of that, because that we are very specifically designed, because we are designed eternally, you know, forever and ever. Now, the body won't last forever. It's going to go away. But the soul's not. And so, when I was looking at all this, I thought, well, you know, this is very fundamental, basic stuff, but I had some questions that people, a lot of times people will call my house and ask questions, you know, and I try to answer them as best I can. Sometimes I have to tell them, I don't know. That's the best answer sometimes to give, rather than giving them information that's not right. Let's look at something else. Now, Job 31, let's go over to Job. Let's go, we might look at two verses in Job. Job 31, verse 15. I'm going to give you a little similitude and likeness here to all of what God created. And we're going to look at this for just a minute. So Job 31, verse 15. I was over on the right-hand side one time. Bruce, would you get that for me?
Did not he that made me in the womb make him? Did not one fashion us in the womb?
Okay. I don't know how it is with most people, but if you have ever witnessed the birth of a child, either you've seen pictures of it, or you've seen a video of it, or you've been there in person when you saw the birth of a child. Whenever the seed of man enters into the woman and the fertilization occurs, and that child begins to grow. Now, if I was kind of a dumb individual, if I was an atheist, I might not believe in God. But if I really wanted to know and understand God, you think about what this is talking about. If we're going to understand God, he said, shall mortal man, think about this, did not he make man in the womb, make him, and did not one fashion us in the womb? If there's anything in the world to the proof of God, it's the birth of a child. It's the conception of a child. That's the proof of God. Now, if I'm going to prove God, that's how I'm going to start. I'm going to say, hey, look, if you don't believe in God, go and watch or go and see or look or investigate or read or study about what God did of how man can regenerate. You know, how did that? Now man, in all of his infinite wisdom that God hath given man, he cannot surpass that. He can't take that away. He can't change that. Now, I can tell you in the medical field, there's some unimaginable things that's happening right now. You know, things that my son tells me all the time about the heart and what they can do now without opening the chest and all that. Oh, that's a fantastic, wonderful thing. But here's something they'll never be able to change or mess with. And everybody in the medical field will tell you that. They can never mess with this particular part. The seed of man and the seed of woman, and growing that child within that body. Have you ever thought about what man couldn't have figured that out? He couldn't have made it so the woman could grow that child in her body. Man couldn't have done that. He has no way. It's just like every medical professional in the world will tell you, oh no, there wasn't any way to do that. You can't grow them in a petri dish. You might put the seeds together, but you know where you're going to have to put them to grow them? You got to find that woman. Just like God made in the beginning, you have to find that woman. And you're going to have to grow up in that woman. You see, and this is not ugly. This is real. This is what the Bible's teaching. And you know, people say, well, you know, I get the gist of that, but I don't really believe. You ever tried to convince people to believe in God? This is one of the ways I've been trying to convince a man to believe in God. Look at what God did in the beginning. You cannot change these things. You can't add to them. You can't take from them. This is how it's going to be from the time it began to the time it ends. Any thoughts, comments, questions before we go to the next one? All right. Let's look at something else. Let me look at this one right here. I'm going to skip over some of this stuff. In Psalms 139, verse 14, I'm going to go back over there for just a minute. Psalms 139, verse number 14. I'm going to skip back to the back. And Tori, we hadn't heard from you in a while. Let's get you to reading. Okay. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are the works that my soul knoweth right well. Think about this for just a moment. This is a wonderful thing. Fearfully and wonderfully made. Doesn't that go back to all things that we've talked about before? Did you do that, Terry? Okay. One of those things fell off the wall over there and fell down. But anyway, let's go back to this thought. Fearfully and wonderfully made. It cannot change. It will not change. There won't be any time in the future that man will reach a level or a point that he can change what God did in the beginning. And that's why I'm studying with you this morning the story of creation. Some of the things that people don't ever take literally, don't ever look at things in the way that they ought to. All right, let's look at something else. When we think about this, I want to look at, I'm going to run over to the New Testament for a minute here. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 11:7 so I can make a comment on this before we quit, because my time's almost run out on me this morning. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 11, verse number 7. I want to make a comment on this. Gary Bragg, I'm going to come over to you.
11 and 7.
Uh-huh.
For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for as much as he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of the man.
Somebody says, uh-oh, you're going to get in the bind on this one. How is it that the woman is the glory of the man? Somebody tell me that. Anybody got any thoughts on that? How's the woman the glory of the man? Huh? Yeah. But man, if he's just by himself, he ain't going nowhere. He can't go nowhere. He can't do nothing. But I tell you what the glory of the man is. When God looked upon that man and he said, it's not good. It's not good. This is what God said. It's not good for man to be alone. What did God anticipate and what did God expect? He says, look, I look over here and this man by himself, he ain't got no glory. He's made in the image of God. He's been given all these things that we talked about earlier, but he needs something else, and he needs the glory. What's the glory? It's the woman. Now, I don't know. You know, some people say, well, I don't need a woman. May not. But I tell you what, if you ever want to regenerate, if you ever want something in the future like that precious little baby that gal's holding right there, if you ever want one of them, you know what the glory of the man is? The woman. The woman. And so, my time's run by me, but this morning I wanted y'all to look at the very fundamental, basic principles of creation. And whenever you're trying to convince people to believe in God, I started out trying to help this individual to believe in God. And I thought, where can I go with this? I started in the very beginning, when God created man, when he took from the dust of the earth, and when he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and when he imparted a living soul. That's the image of God. That's the only eternal part of man. And you carry it all the way from there into the things that I've talked about today. And there's about 20 other things I wanted to get to, but you know, I can't do it in a 25-minute or 27-minute period. But anyway, is there any thoughts, comments, or questions before we quit? We got 2 minutes. We're not on a time schedule, by the way. And nobody's ever given me a time schedule here. And Alan's still keeping me, you know, going, so he ain't fired me yet. So, but anyway, y'all think about this for a moment. And we're talking about the importance of knowing how important man is and what God did in the very beginning and what really made the difference of everything that you can think about. It's all about God breathing into the nostrils the breath of life and imparting a living soul, and then seeing that he needed the glory. The man needed something else, and he needed the glory. And the glory was the woman that he gave him. And that glory was the fact that he could regenerate. He could carry on. All right.